U.S. and Israeli forces continue battering Iranian targets on land and sea. The strikes are sinking 20 ships and depleting missile launchers.
Iran continues to launch missiles and drones at Israel and other countries in the region. Its proxy, Hezbollah, is also increasing attacks from southern Lebanon. CBN Middle East correspondent Paul Petit reports.
In an escalating assault from air and sea, U.S. and Israeli forces continue to strike Iran, Hezbollah bases in Beirut, and Iranian warships in the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean.
The Iranian Air Force is no more. Built for 1996, destroyed in 2026. The Iranian Navy rests at the bottom of the Persian Gulf.
In all, the administration says 20 Iranian naval vessels have been destroyed. Hegseth says the Iranian leader behind a Trump assassination plot in 2024 has also been eliminated. As plans to strike deeper into Iranian territory continues, the Secretary of War also warns any attempt by Iran to hunker down in an effort to deplete American munition supplies will fail.
Iran cannot outlast us. As I said, that we set the tone and the tempo of this fight.
Iran has continued its haphazard airstrikes. This missile landed near the Syrian airport, and a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Mediterranean shot down an Iranian missile invading Turkey's airspace. The potential attack on a NATO ally raises the risk of pulling other NATO nations into the war.
Both Israel and the U.S. are hitting around the clock ballistic launchers and missiles, degrading systematically the ability of Iran to shoot missiles and drones. So far, Iran shot 500 ballistic missiles to different countries and 2,000 drones. But every day they shoot less and less.
Missiles simultaneously fired by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and Hezbollah did hit central Israel Wednesday, with 2 injuries reported. Since the start of the war, 10 Israeli civilians have been killed by Iranian missile strikes. 9 of them died just outside Jerusalem when these homes and the synagogue were hit. Now this breaks your heart. This was once a synagogue. Now this is what's left. Take a look. Burnt out pages of a Hebrew prayer book, a kippah, a Hebrew shawl. People were worshiping here on Sunday when the sirens went off and they took cover. 30 people went inside that bomb shelter. 3 of them died. That's why the rabbi we spoke with says Iran isn't a country, it's a terrorist state.
That is the game plan, and that is the playbook for all terrorists. They go out of their way to target civilians.
In Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei's son is the favorite to succeed his father, who was killed in airstrikes. The Israeli Defense Forces are promising to eliminate whomever is chosen as the next supreme leader. The Jerusalem Post reports hundreds of Kurdish fighters are operating inside Iran territory along the Iraqi border. General Aviv says overall, the Iranian war strategy is clearly backfiring.
The Iranian strategy is to create chaos, try to create pressure on the U.S. by rising prices of oil, and trying to shoot these countries in order for them to pressure the U.S. to stop. It's doing exactly the opposite. More and more countries are joining the U.S. and Israel in a coalition that is being formed and growing.
The Secretary of War believes the end result for Iran will be decisive.
They are toast, and they know it.
Paul Petit, CBN News, BEIT SHEMESH, Israel.
Well, joining us now is Yakil Leiter, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, welcome to the 700 Club.
Thank you, Gordon. Good to be with you. Good morning.
What does victory look like for Israel in this? I know we're still sort of early in the war, but it looks like the victory is assured. But what from your point of view, is victory for Israel?
Victory is the absence of an entity in Tehran, which is a terrorist entity, exporter of terror, where they have no capability of producing nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, or supporting proxies around the Middle East that destabilize and spread mayhem and murder. That's victory.
Well, after the June attack, I said the real target and the real weapon of war here is the state itself. It's not their nuclear ambition or those facilities that were struck. It's them. They're the architect of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of the Houthis, and until they're removed, you're not ever going to see peace in the Middle East. So, in terms of that victory, is it needed to have boots on the ground, and if so, is Israel prepared to do that?
What's needed are boots on the ground, but Iranian boots. Look, this is very different than Iraq or Afghanistan or really any other war that's taken place over the past decades. The Iranian people want change. 80% of the Iranian people don't identify with this regime. And they're rising up. I mean, we saw what they did last month. Tens of thousands were willing to give their lives for freedom. So boots on the ground will be there, but they're going to come from the Iranian people themselves. Yeah, there are many minorities that have had the boot of the Ayatollahs on their necks now for 47 years, and they're ready to rise up and take charge. And what we need is to move into a phase of a transitional government that will be comprised of the various opposition parties, the various minorities, until they can actually move the country into free and open elections, let's say, in a year's time or so. But the first part of this objective is to bring this regime down. It's regime collapse, not regime change at this point, but regime collapse. Because you can't have Ayatollahs. These people are believers. They believe that everyone across the globe has to come under the boot of their brand of Islam. This is not Venezuela. It's not a bunch of thugs that are selling drugs. These are people who believe that you and I have to change our belief, and if we don't, we have to be subservient to them.
Well, it's interesting that they formed an alliance with Venezuela, and that, you know, what is the influence of this Islamic ideology in the leadership of Venezuela? But leaving that issue aside, just the sheer penetration of the ideology within the country, just as we've seen with Hamas in Gaza, that it just seems the civilian population wants to help them hold captives, wants to help them disguise the tunnels, doesn't seem to have a big problem with the hospitals and the schools being used as fronts, and even, you know, their own children being offered up in sacrifice to this ideology. How deep does it go? I'm hearing reports there are over 2,000 Republican Guard generals. The clerics are trying to elect a new Ayatollah. Is it really possible to change Iran?
It absolutely is. As I said, only 20% of the population identifies with this regime, but 20% in a country of over 90 million people is significant. You know, so yes, they have a huge military edifice, but it's cracking. I mean, the good news this morning, Gordon, is that we're seeing cracks in their chain of command. Once we took off the head of the snake in that initial strike, and we continue to pound them. I mean, as we're talking, IDF jets are pounding Tehran, the command centers of the IRGC, of the internal security apparatus. I mean, they have some 30 organizations that are dedicated to keeping this tyranny over the heads of the Iranians. But once the cracks widen into wider chasms, the opposition is going to coalesce, unify, and hopefully begin to take over the streets. We see it happening, and you know, some indicators are, for example, they have not appointed a successor yet, number one. Number two, they haven't buried Khamenei yet. They're in complete disarray. And the wild fire of missiles around the entire region into their neighbors, into the Gulf states that have become our real allies in this battle against Iran. And they're firing of missiles into Azerbaijan, a country of 10 million Shiite Muslims, into Turkey, into Europe, attacking Cyprus. This is an indication of their beginnings of desperation. So that's actually a good sign.
Well, some people are calling it a widening of the war. Are these other countries, and I agree, it's indiscriminate. It doesn't seem to be any real command and control. It seems like each one of the missile batteries gets to pick their target. But is there danger of this becoming a much wider war? And if the other Gulf states get into this action, what does that mean?
You know, Gordon, if you take a look at a candle flame, sometimes before the flame goes out, it kind of shoots up a bit. Yeah, they're trying every last-ditch effort to stay alive. They have no way of staying alive without shooting off missiles because that's the only thing they really have. They've deprived their people of water, of food, of electricity, of freedom. And what they have left really is only kinetic power. So whatever they have, they're shooting. It's something we have to deal with for days, perhaps a few weeks. But this is going to end, and it's going to end in total victory against this tyrannical, really lunatic regime.
Let's talk about the power vacuum that's being created right before our eyes. And you know, this was of concern back in, I mean, it's a quarter century now, the Gulf War and taking out the leadership in Iraq. And, you know, what happened in the aftermath, it seemed like Iran had a direct line into Lebanon. In the power vacuum being created, does it mean that Turkey is now going to have increased control over Syria and Lebanon? And that has to be of concern to Israel.
Well, certainly the rhetoric coming out of Erdogan in Turkey is of concern to us. But remember, Turkey has been the recipient as well of this extremism. They were hit with missiles as well. So I think there's a lesson to be learned throughout the Middle East that this kind of fundamentalist extremism, this Islamism, which wants everyone under the boot of a particular brand of Islam, is being defeated. You're absolutely right that they had control for the most part over Lebanon, for example, through the Hezbollah. Hezbollah has chosen to join this war. Unfortunately, we've made clear messages. We've sent clear messages to Beirut that they have to begin to do everything, really do everything possible to curb Hezbollah. We're not going to tolerate it. We don't want to destroy Lebanon, but we're not going to tolerate missiles raining down on our heads from Hezbollah. They also have intentions of sending their Red One force, which is kind of their, commandos who have been trained actually in Iran to our border to try to penetrate like Hamas did on October 7th. We're not going to let that happen. So we're putting a lot of pressure on the Beirut government to come to terms with the fact that they have to take on Hezbollah, not in words, but actually in action. So they've begun this morning. They've revoked visas for IRGC members sitting in Beirut. They need to close down that embassy, the Iranian embassy, which is used as a command center for terrorist activity in Lebanon, and they need to throw out the IRGC members.
Is it possible for them for the Lebanese government to reform? It seems that Hezbollah is just so embedded in their thought process and their decision, in their membership. I'm old enough to remember my very first trip to Lebanon. It was all the way back in 1969, so I'm kind of an old guy over here. And it was the jewel of the Mediterranean. It was the example of how a state can exist where Jews and Christians and Muslims and Druze and none of the above can all come together and have a very prosperous and wonderful place to live. Can we see that come to be again?
Gordon, we absolutely can see it come to fruition. You know, you look all over the world in different areas of the globe, and you've got Jews and Lebanese Christians and Druze Lebanese in business together, actually creating a beautiful future for themselves, their communities, their families. There's no reason why that can't be the same situation between our two countries. The vast majority of Lebanese want peace. I have extensive relationships throughout Lebanon, both here in Washington as well, and they pine for peace. They pray for peace. There's nothing that they have with Israel, no issues really. There's some borders details that we can work out probably in a few hours. But it's Hezbollah that has taken over this country, that's raped this country as emissaries of Iran. Once Iran is defeated, or this government, I should say, of Iran is defeated, Hezbollah will not have its sugar daddy, will not have the funds to the tune of $1 billion that they receive every year from Iran. and they're gonna fold shop. And until that happens, we're going to be very vigilant. Our people are very resilient. We're not leaving the north this time. Our families are hunkered down. They're going to stay there, and Hezbollah is going to be beaten back by the IDF this time permanently.
How does Israel win the peace here? This seems to be a recurring theme that you get wars and terror attacks again and again and again, and going all the way back to 1948. And it never seems, you can win every single battle, but then you never really win the peace. What's the plan now with this ideological change, assuming it happens in Iran and this Islamic death cult is finally eliminated? How does the peace spread throughout the Middle East?
Well, when you take a bird's eye view and kind of leave the moment, you see dramatic change taking place. I mean, look at the relationship between Israel and the Emirates, for example. It is probably closer than Israel has relationships with most European countries today. The same thing with Bahrain, the same thing with Morocco. Unfortunately, Sudan is mired in civil war, but the Abraham Accords in 2020 thrust us into an entire new age in potential. And now we can potentially see the other Arab states in the Gulf coming to the fore and choosing moderation, accommodation, and reform over the fanaticism that Iran represents and exported. So I think that we can move into a new era of Abraham Accords 2.0 when this war is over. And, you know, it's really important for the American people to understand that the potential here for regional cooperation and peace throughout the Middle East gives the United States an opportunity to move its assets, its footprint, military footprint, in the Middle East to the Far East, where it's needed more to ensure that China doesn't become a regional hegemon and threaten the United States. So this has a link to a much, much bigger picture. And the bigger picture sees regional cooperation between Israel and the Gulf states, peace in the region, stability, and a free flow of oil and gas, which is necessary for the entire world's economy. And I think there's a lot of promise. We just have to pick our heads up above the turrets right now, because war is difficult. You know, Gordon, I know personally how difficult war is. I lost my oldest son in battle in Gaza, and nobody wants to see war. Nobody wants to see families get that knock on the door. But there are things we have to do for the future of humanity. And this really is a battle for the future of humanity, because if we don't stop these lunatics in Tehran that are shooting ballistic missiles into their neighbors as if they're, I don't know, flying kites. Tomorrow, they're going to outfit these ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. And imagine all of these missiles that they fired into Cyprus, into Turkey, into the Emirates, into Bahrain, into Saudi Arabia, and into Israel will be outfitted with nuclear warheads. This is what they're pining to do. This is what they plan to do. If we didn't hit them this week, in several months, they would be in an underground facility pairing enriched uranium with the ability to deliver it on warheads. I mean, why do you build a facility so deep underground that even B-2s can't get to it? That was the direction they took after Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer in June. And the president of the United States warned them. They said, after that operation, after Midnight Hammer, don't pursue nuclear weapons. And what they did was just the reverse. They pursued nuclear weapons to the point where even B-2s would not be able to attack. And that's why this was so important to do now. That's why it was so imminent. And thank God we have a leadership in the United States, which is the leader of the free world and the insurer of the free world. We're junior partners here, but we're privileged to be partners with the United States right now.
Well, they opened the negotiations and supposedly the peace negotiations with a declaration of how much enriched uranium they had. And anyone who has any kind of physics background, they were a week away from developing 11 nuclear bombs. They had enough material to do that. And that's why the president said, no, you're not going to do that on my watch. Back to the 10,000-foot view, the longer view, is there concern, and I'm concerned, that Spain and France are not joining in on this, and it seems to be because they have a significant Muslim population. I'm concerned that a potential candidate for the presidency of the United States is now calling Israel an apartheid state. That seems to be part of the Democrat primary process, that how distant can you get from Israel in order to win that primary. I'm hearing it also within conservative circles in the United States. As we win the battle militarily, are we losing the ideological battle at the same time?
It's an ideological challenge. I don't think we're losing the battle. I think what we're hearing are the voices of extremists on both sides. I spend 2 days a week on the Hill. I divide my time between Republicans and Democrats, and I can tell you that the majority of the American people are rock solid in this partnership with Israel. They see our two armies, the most powerful air forces in the world, the most experienced and most able, flying side by side. I'd say shoulder to shoulder, but it's more like wing to wing. We both heard Secretary of War Hegseth yesterday and the Chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, speak about the relationship between our two countries and our two armies. And that's the way it should be. This is the protectors. We are the protectors of Judeo-Christian civilization. And the fact that there is a candidate who speaks with such ignorance and arrogance about the state of Israel is unfortunate. But look, he can repent and take it back once he learns a bit about the state of Israel. You know, to infer that an apartheid state. You know, we had an Arab Christian judge on the Supreme Court who sent the Jewish president of the country to jail. That's not exactly an apartheid state. Let them come to our universities and see Muslim Christians and Jews studying side by side to become pharmacists and doctors. You know, my son, who I lost, was an MD, and the first year he couldn't get in because of quotas to assure that our Muslim population would have a fair share at studying medicine. So let nobody besmirch the state of Israel, calling us all sorts of names. It's become popular over the past 2 years or so. You know, France, of all countries, after the gross murderous regimes that they propped up in Africa for so many years, the slaughters of so many innocent Africans, and they're lecturing to us about how to conduct the war. They should be ashamed. Macron should be ashamed of himself. He will be. And certainly Spain was leading this effort in Europe to demonize and delegitimize the state of Israel. It'll change. It'll blow back. It'll come to haunt them. And in the meantime, we're going to pursue this brilliant relationship that we have with our senior partner, our older brother in the United States. And we're going to move to protect even those countries that are now besmirching our efforts to make the world a safer place.
Well, we stand with you in this, and it's interesting you referenced Defender of the Faith. That is an old title, going all the way back to Charles the Hammer Martel and Charlemagne. And the reason they had that title was the Muslim invasion coming in from Spain, the Battle of Tours, the sack of Burgundy, these historical things that I think most Americans aren't aware of that history at all. But it's interesting to hear you say that. Once again, we're called on to defend our civilization, and we need to recognize that's exactly what we're doing. This is not just a physical battle, it's a spiritual battle, it's an ideological battle. What kind of future do we want for our children and our grandchildren? Ambassador, thank you for your sacrifice. We mourn with you for your son. May his memory be forever a blessing to you, and may it give you the steely resolve that we all need in order to finish this task. His sacrifice should always be remembered.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you for being with us.